of government for a city this size.
Portland is so unique. Even our charter kind of goes into some weird places that other cities' charters don't.
Our commission system has been in place for more than 100 years, but a lot's changed in 100 years.
That if we could switch our form of government, it would be more effective.
Right now, discussions are underway that could change things. And it turns out one of the sites for the city's safe rest villages is a no-go because it's in a floodplain. Whoops. You'd think they would have checked that first. Here's the story.
Gotta look for the ducks. There were ducks there. We'll talk about that in just a minute. I'm Dan Haggerty. Hi. Thanks for being with us. This is The Story. Welcome. All the ways to communicate with us at the bottom of your screen. Please use the hashtag HeyDan on Twitter or email us at thestory@kgw.com. I want to hear what you think. What's on your mind as you watch the show tonight? So, I did want to tell you a campaign to recall Portland Mayor Ted Wheeler seems to be going down in flames, which isn't really surprising at all. I mean, the guy was just reelected like 10 months ago. The city kind of spoke up about what they wanted then. He won with, 46% of the vote, became the first Portland mayor to be reelected in 2 decades. But the organizers of this campaign to recall Mayor Wheeler, they still were confident they could get it done. They were so sure when we talked to them back in July when they first started gathering signatures.
If you look at the number, Wheeler did not win by the popular vote. So while this seems like a really big number, he wasn't even elected to office by the popular vote. So a majority of Portland already disagreed with him being elected.
Yeah, that's one way to do the math. They spent the summer gathering signatures to get the recall on the ballot, but it wasn't enough. They were, behind from the very beginning. They weren't hitting any of their benchmarks when it came to these signatures. According to the Oregonian, they got a little more than 19,000 signatures altogether. They needed 48,000. They didn't even get half. The deadline was today. They tried to get the deadline extended, claiming that the pandemic and the heat this summer made it harder for them to gather the signatures that they needed, but they were shot down by the city auditor's office. They were like, no, that's not going to work out. Now they do have one last-ditch effort, though. They're throwing a little Hail Mary. They're taking it to court. They're going to sue to get their deadline extended, claiming that the 90-day window to gather signatures is unconstitutionally short. Well, we'll let you know how it turns out. Now, Ted Wheeler hasn't exactly been the most popular mayor. I think we can all understand that. He's been attacked at restaurants. Protesters have camped outside of his condo building. He's often widely criticized for decisions that he makes and for decisions that he doesn't make, like when he urged violent extremist protesters to choose love rather than brawl in the street and shoot at each other. People, they thought that was kind of silly. And then when he told police to hold off from responding from the fights that we did see between those groups, people thought that was a bad idea. When he announced that the city wasn't going to do business with Texas over their new abortion law before there was actually a plan in place to even do that, people were like, what are you doing? And he's been the head of the city through the pandemic and the protests and the widespread vandalism and the shootings and an ongoing homeless crisis that no one seems to be able to ever solve. You get the point. Businesses have been shut down left and right because of all of those problems, and people are complaining about the police, and the police are complaining about the city leaders. I'm out of breath. I mean, that's the life of Portland Mayor Ted Wheeler. So, okay. Now, there's a lot going on, and it's understandable that people would think that there should be a change. But recalling the mayor was always going to be a long shot. Nearly every Portland mayor in recent history has faced a recall threat, but only 2 of those have ever even made it to a ballot, and neither of those ever succeeded. And if Wheeler had been recalled, there's no deputy mayor. There's no vice mayor or assistant mayor, anyone really waiting in the wings to step up and take that job. His position would become vacant, and we'd have to wait until there was another special election after the recall election just to get a replacement in that seat. And that brings us to our big story and the way that Portland runs the city. See, we use a style of government here that's been abandoned by every other major city in the country, and right now, there's a big push to change that. The Charter Commission, they meet every 10 years to discuss the city charter. They're meeting right now, and this is a big part of the conversation. But let's start from the top here, all right? Just to get everybody to square one. Now, everywhere I've ever lived, those cities were broken up into a bunch of different districts. And then the people who live in those districts, they vote for a council person to represent them on city council. But that's not how it works here. So let's take a quick crash course on Portland's commission style of government. Now, our commission is made up of the mayor and 4 commissioners. Now, the first big difference comes in how these people are elected. The whole city gets a vote on each of these 5 positions, not like the council style I was just describing. The second big difference is about how much power our commissioners have. In Portland, the mayor assigns each commissioner a few bureaus to lead. For instance, the mayor is also the police commissioner. Dan Ryan is also heading up the housing bureau. Mingus Mapps also is in charge of the water bureau. Now, in other major cities, those jobs are held by different people. Now, 100 years ago, in 1920, when Portland had like 250,000 people living here, this commission style was kind of a progressive idea. It was a way to give voters some real control over the bureaus that kept the city running. But in 2021, in a city of nearly 700,000 people, it almost seems silly to give one person so much work to do. I mean, think of it this way. Joanne Hardesty, the commissioner, she is an outspoken person who contributes to the conversation on every important policy decision in this city. But she's also in charge of the entire Bureau of Transportation and Fire and Rescue and the Office of Community and Civic Life. If I were pitching this style of government today and I told a person that one person would have all those jobs, you'd probably start laughing. But that's how we do it here. And the City Club of Portland is convinced that it's time for a change.
The overall perspective was that if we could switch our form of government, it would be more effective. It would lead to a more, in fact, cohesive city council working towards the benefit of the whole city, and it would better represent the interests of the whole city.
I talked to Mark Steffen. He's with the City Club. He's also a professor at Washington State in the School of Politics, Philosophy, and Public Affairs, and he's helping to present their opinion to the Charter Commission.
How difficult would it be in actuality to make a change like this?
Yeah, and that was partly what I was trying to get to, was that there's some education that needs to occur. This would take some money. There would be some adjustments. There would be a couple of years of having to learn this new system. But a lot of other governments have done this across the country. They have made these changes. They've made even arguably bigger changes to their form of government and have been able to do so in an effective amount of time. So it's not easy, but it's definitely doable. And I think in the city of Portland, it's very doable.
How critical is it, though? Because this discussion has come up before. Do you think we've reached a point where something has to be done?
Critical in the sense of government functioning at all? No. I mean, I don't think we have to do anything if we want government to function. But if we want to govern better, if we want better governance in the city of Portland, these changes are the ones that City Club really believes, and a lot of us really believe just really need to be made. And so we'll have more effective governments over time, and we'll have better, more responsive governments over time. And these are worth pushing for.
I know this isn't the most exciting stuff in the world. I know some of you are like halfway through that interview, kind of looking down and flipping through your Instagram, but look back up. Okay, I know this sounds like a whole bunch of political gobbledygook. Maybe you're thinking to yourself, why do I care about this story? I don't have a lot of control over what happens. This seems like it's up to the people in this Charter Review Commission, whoever they are, the professors at the City Club. But you're wrong. You're very, very, very wrong. In fact, you have a big amount of responsibility here, because nothing can change without you. The only way to change our style of government is with a vote. And Portlanders have voted down changes 5 times since 1950. 1950, 58, 66, 2002, 2007. Voters said no. Why did they say no so many times? Well, I don't know. There are a lot of theories on that. Some people think that the voters just don't understand this stuff well enough, hence stories like this one. Others think that Portlanders are stubborn and they like being an outlier, even if it means operating with an antiquated form of government. And some say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And technically, as that person was just saying, that professor, our government isn't broke. After all, you can cook food on a campfire. Who needs an oven? But I asked Mark if he thinks this time around, will it be different? And he said, yes.
I think reforms are on the horizon. I think there's a strong enough feeling. And one of the key things that we haven't talked about is that there's an attempt by the Charter Review Commission itself and also a lot of other civic groups to really increase citizen engagement on this topic at these earlier moments, not just waiting until there's a referendum later on. And there's a sense that we want to make some changes. It's going to make things better, and there's a commitment to that I think makes this moment much more likely to be a moment of change than we've seen before.
Or not. I mean, who knows, really? Predictions, right? We'll wait and see. In the meantime, I'm going to keep trying to convince you that this is a really important issue in your life, and hopefully, if it ever reaches your ballot, you'll agree. Now, let's stay in this political realm here for a moment. I want to start this part of the segment with a question. When you're going to go move into a new house, for instance, you usually go and check it out first, right? Give it a look-see. If you're opening a new business, you want to go and survey the site, check to make sure that there aren't any major issues, things that won't cause some problems down the line. This is like an obvious first step, unless you're the city of Portland. See, last week the city announced the first, right, of those 3 sites for the Safe Rest Villages. The city says these are going to be safe places for homeless people to camp, and they want to open them by the end of the year. Well, now one of those sites is already off the drawing board because it turns out no one actually went down there to check it out and see if, I don't know, maybe it was in a floodplain, which it turns out it was a big one. Pat Doris explains.
When the city recently announced the locations of 3 homeless villages it would build on public land by the end of the year, this lot near the Springwater corridor, not far from Precision Cast Parts, was on the list. But we wonder if anyone actually visited the place, because if they did, they somehow missed that the lot sits at the bottom of a large hill and that there are wetlands all around it. It's so wet, there's a sign asking people not to feed the ducks. The city now admits no one checked to see if the lot sits in a floodplain. It does, and now it's off the list for the homeless village. Neighbors, including Stephen Johnson, could not believe the site was picked in the first place.
I've worked in underwriting for commercial projects for a while now, and flood searches is kind of one of the first things you want to do. They're not expensive, and the FEMA records are really clear on where there are floodplains. But just looking at where they'd drawn the box on the map, I thought, well, isn't about half of that underwater?
Yes, turns out that's about right. But neighbors say the location is not the only thing the city bungled. The city also failed to communicate.
Probably the most upsetting thing was just that there was no effort at communicating to the neighborhood about it. That there was no buy-in, that they didn't brace me for it or tell me if it had some kind of special mission or some kind of a useful thing like that.
Last week, when announcing the locations for the villages, City Commissioner Dan Ryan, who is in charge of all this, spoke boldly about the plan.
First of all, you should know this about me. I like to set goals. I like to set ambitious goals. And I like to be held accountable to do all we can to achieve them.
Apparently, that does not include being held accountable on camera when there are mistakes. I wanted to talk with him today about the Springwater location, but was told he's not available today or any day for the rest of the week. His office instead offered a written statement. It says he's disappointed and moving on with the project. In the meantime, some question whether it matters that the lot is in a floodplain. Take a drive, as I did, along Southeast Foster past 112th in the Johnson Creek floodplain, and you'll see more than a few vehicles used by the homeless living there. The floodplain issue is likely a minor embarrassment in the big scope of things, but it does feed the feeling of some in Portland, including cyclist Richard Younts, who often rides in the Springwater area. The feeling is that the city has lost its way and is now stumbling through the dark.
The whole issue of all these camps and where to put them and how to fund it and what to do, I don't think it's ever going to get resolved.
Pat Doris reporting there for us. I hope that man's not right, who we interviewed at the end there. Thanks to Pat for that report. Now, we continue to get your emails and your comments about things like vaccine mandates in Oregon and Washington. We got 2 within an hour of each other this morning. I'll give you both of them now. Corrine wrote, "If you don't believe in the medicine you practice, then why practice it at all? You are doing a total disservice to your patients and community." Then Heidi wrote in defending unvaccinated healthcare workers, saying, "It would seem that if these folks have remained healthy and safe throughout the first year and a half, they must be experts at the protocols and will probably follow even more closely than those vaccinated." Under Governor Kate Brown's order, healthcare workers must be vaccinated by October 18th or be fired, lose their jobs. Hundreds of workers have already been put on unpaid leave for not starting the vaccination process. But the big question is, did these mandates actually work? Kristen Severance is here with the numbers.
We've gotten several questions about the vaccine mandates, so we set out to answer. Did the mandates lead to an increase in vaccinations, or did a large majority of healthcare workers leave their jobs instead? We specifically looked at hospitals in Oregon, and based on the number of vaccinated workers before the mandate compared to now, we can say yes, the mandates did lead to more people getting the shot. Remember, these were the very first people who could get the COVID vaccine starting in December of 2020. We reached out to the following health systems about this: OHSU, Providence, Legacy Health, Kaiser Permanente, Salem Health, and we asked for the number of vaccinated workers again before the mandates were announced compared to now. So let's take a look at OHSU. So they have 22,000 employees and students. So before the mandate, they had 86% vaccinated. Compare that to now to 94% fully vaccinated. All right, now let's take a look at Providence. 23,000 employees. They had 80% vaccinated before the mandate compared to 90% vaccinated now. The next health system, Salem Health, they have roughly 6,000 employees. Before the mandate, 75% vaccination rate compared to an 83% fully vaccinated rate now. Now let's look at Kaiser Permanente. Okay, so they have more than 11,000 employees. 79% vaccinated before the mandate, compared that to 89% vaccinated now. 1,000 workers applied for the exemption, and Kaiser did not put them on leave. They are still looking over those exemption forms. They did put 166 people on leave who either did not get vaccinated or did not submit a medical or religious exemption form. All right, and lastly, let's take a look at Legacy. So 14,000 employees. Before the mandate, 85% vaccinated compared to 95% now. They have 700 employees on unpaid leave, but 90 of those workers did start their vaccination process. So again, based on all of these numbers, we can say the mandate did lead to an increase in vaccination rates. I talked to Courtney Campbell about this. He runs the Medical Ethics and Humanities program at Oregon State University.
You know, it's not a win-win. This is not, we would hope that everyone would have wanted to go in. I mean, a mandate takes away choice ethically. And, you know, the alternatives, you know, for some people are they lose their jobs. So it's not a win-win for particular individuals. But insofar as this is a public health or professional response, I mean, I think that they've been an effective approach.
All of these health systems expect these numbers to go up as the deadline gets closer. Technically, employees have until October 18th to be fully vaccinated. However, some health systems, including Legacy, said unvaccinated workers who get even one shot by the deadline can keep their jobs. We will continue to track these numbers. Do you have a question? Do you have a comment? Let us know. All you have to do is use that hashtag #HeyDan.
All right, Kristen, thank you. Let's count some vaccines. As of this afternoon, more than 2.8 million Oregonians have gotten at least their first dose of a shot. We're about 66.9% of the state's population at this point with one shot. In Washington, more than 5.1 million people have gotten at least their first dose, which works out to be 67.7% of the state's population. Now, the water in our rivers is getting warmer, and it's having devastating effects on our fish. Video released. Look at that salmon there. The heat is not doing well on them.
Our fish are dying in these waterways because of lethal summer water temperatures.
And it's going to lead to extinction.
Now, at least one industry working in the Columbia River is going to have to change the way it does business. We'll explain when the story continues. I always go through your questions and comments during the break. Keep sending them to the story at kgw.com or use the hashtag #HeyDan on Twitter. I also want to remind you about our Hey Help campaign. This week, we're asking you to consider donating to Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women USA. They're an Oregon-based organization that works to find Indigenous women. Your donations help them to spread the word about missing Native women and to pay for the basic supplies and needs of family who have lost a loved one. If you want to help them out, just hold your phone's camera up to the QR code you see on your screen. It'll take you to a donation page, or you can go to kgw.com/heyhelp. This is a micro donation drive, so feel free to give any amount you'd like, no matter how small. Now, a few months ago, we took you under the water to get a closer look at some local salmon that were sick and dying. The water they were in was too warm for them, An environmental group sued the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to try and stop that warming. Now, it took years, but it worked. Now the Corps will have to help lower the temperature of the river. I know it all sounds very complicated, but luckily, Kaylee Chalmers is here to explain.
The video was taken this summer in the Little White Salmon River, right where it meets up with the Columbia. It shows sockeye salmon covered in lesions and fungus, the result of water that was 71 degrees.
Temperature is everything to fish.
Longtime fishing guide Bob Reese will tell you that is way too hot.
It's just flat out lethal to these wild and hatchery salmon that come up back into these rivers.
Reese has been a professional fishing guide for 31 years. He knows the Columbia River well.
That's the Astoria Bridge behind me here.
And the fish that swim in it, he knows, are in trouble.
Our fish are dying in these waterways because of lethal summer water temperatures.
The Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife says salmon exposed to water above 68 degrees have an increased risk of stress, disease, and mortality.
And it's going to lead to extinction.
Brett Vandenheuvel is executive director of Columbia Riverkeeper, the group that took this underwater video. It has long maintained that the large reservoirs behind the dams are to blame in part for the warmer river water. The group first sued the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, which owns and operates the dams, back in 2013. And just last week, they got a victory.
For the first time ever, the federal dams on the Columbia now have to reduce the amount of pollution that they're creating.
Starting this spring, the Environmental Protection Agency will require dam operators to limit hot water pollution caused by the 4 lower Snake River dams. The Snake River is a major tributary to the Columbia. It's a move Reese and Vandenheuvel say is long overdue. But this is an important step in helping salmon survive a warming climate, because as many experts will tell you, without significant change, they won't.
It's a really critical time right now. There's a limited amount of time before we drive species of salmon to extinction. So the time is now for action.
Kaylee Chalmers, KGW News.
All right, keep sending in those questions and comments to the story at kgw.com. Use the hashtag HeyDan on Twitter. We'll read a few of them when we finish the story next. Susan wrote in and said, "Hey Dan, I sat on the city charter committee about 20 years ago. People just like Portland being weird. We failed then and probably will have trouble passing this again." And that's one of the arguments that is made, that people in this area don't mind being an outlier when it comes to their form of city government. That said, with the issues that have been going on recently and the reliance on local government to fix these issues, I think that there is a sense that people might be more willing to discuss a change now than they may have been in the past. But that's just my own personal theory. I don't know how much credit you want to give it. And then Steve wrote in and said, "P.S. I wonder if changing the style of government might be a lot more expensive." I don't know that it would be a lot more expensive. You would have new jobs, right? So there would be different people being hired for different positions. The most expensive part of it initially, I was having this discussion today with the professor, was that it would take a lot of re-educating. I mean, people would have to learn a whole lot more about what it means to have a local representative in, say, a district, or how that all would work, or even the people within the current ranks of government and what their new responsibilities would be. One thing that would be less expensive would be people running to be on city council, right, to be on commission, because they wouldn't have to run a campaign that went all over the city. They would just have to run a campaign in their neck of the woods, in their district, which could open things up for more people to get involved in leadership positions in politics. So, yeah, absolutely. Money will play a part of it. Maybe we'll get into that next. In the meantime, that's the story. I'm Dan Haggerty. See you back here tomorrow.